Live from the Bronx on Halloween night, it's the Poe class. Yes, we are in the domain of ghosts, goblins, ungodly principalities and powers and forces of darkness, whose overseer for the deep state is the nefarious ghoul, Richie Torres. Can he be defeated by the forces of light, represented by Jose Vega? Will the world, or at least the Bronx, be saved? It will be up to the people, not the people who dwell up in the steeple and who are dominated by the forces of darkness, but the people who are prepared to free themselves by studying the works and the poetry of Edgar Poe. To get us started, Kynan, take it away.
Okay, well, hi everyone. Jose is on now. He's out of the Bronx at the moment, but we wanted to give you something a little bit special for this nice Halloween. We're going to we're actually going to start off by reading Edgar Poe's The Black Cat. And just before we get into the reading, I'll just say some things about what happened today. We had a International Peace Coalition meeting. This was with Helga. We had Ray McGovern on, Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who might be familiar to some of you as the one of the doctors who went to Gaza and worked in the hospitals. We also had on John Steinbach and a couple of others. And if people don't already know, this Sunday we're going to be having a very special, our first town hall meeting that Jose is doing. We're going to be having Tony Aguilar, who worked with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, has been in Gaza, and Josephine Gilbo, who will be there in person in the Bronx. So you can register for that by going to votevega.nyc. And without further ado, I think I will start us off with our reading for today. And oh, there's Jose. Jose, are you there?
I am. Sorry, my connection was shaky, but go ahead. Yeah, hi. Were you just introducing me?
Yes, I was just about to.
Okay. I'm sorry, but go ahead, please. Don't stop.
Okay, sure. So let me just pull the reading on now. And Jose, I think, well, why don't you tell us where you are actually? Because I know you were doing something a little bit special today. You're in Washington. You were just coming back from Washington D.C., right?
Yes, that's right. I apologize for the folks if my connection is wobbly, but I did come back from, the aptly nicknamed Swamp. Who don't know, something big happened, and it's most likely that you actually don't know what happened, which is that the Albert Pike statue that was taken down 5 years ago has just been put back up. If this is a name you don't know, Albert Pike, that's because you don't know about Lyndon LaRouche and what he actually did. KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, and his statue went up in 1901, was taken down in 2020, and the Trump administration just put it back up just a few days ago. And I was interviewing the local residents of Washington, D.C., asking them if they knew that this statue had been put back up. And that's a video right there, a still of me with Anton Chaikin, who I went to go and meet. He's a historian, and he's somebody who was going down every Friday to the Pike statue, organizing with Dennis Speed. And sometimes they would even put on Ku Klux Klan robes on the Pike statue. Now, the strongest statement that Lyndon LaRouche ever made in 1992 on the Pike statue was the correlation between the statue and the world's ail that you see happening now. See, you look at the ICE raids, you look at the snap cuts, You look at the public infrastructure that's collapsing. You look at the impending wars, whether it's Ukraine, Russia, or the genocide in Gaza, or the oncoming war with Venezuela, or any other number of ugly, nasty things that are pervasive. What you realize is that the statue is proof that those things are not exclusive to any particular single presidential administration, but rather something completely rotten in our government that is so subversive that makes that decision to put that statue back up, and is the same apparatus that is causing the ails that have subverted the principles of this nation. Because Albert Pike was a traitor, he was a Confederate. He was against the Union. Okay, he was more than just, an advocate for slavery. He was anti-American. And to put up this statue, on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country, though some may say we're already in the 250th anniversary of the founding of this country, goes to show you that the apparatus that has existed within the government since the late 1800s is still very much trying to declare itself alive. And it's only up to the people to decide if they are going to define what the United States actually is. And so hopefully later tonight, I'll be releasing a video of me talking to people just in front of the statue, in front of the Marion Barry building. And there's a funny section where I walk in and I start talking to the security guards, telling them if they know about what's going on, and they say they didn't. I got to go to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to take it up. But regardless, I also ran into an elected official at a city ward council district, or Ward District 8, who had no idea the statue was put up, was completely furious about it, and said she was about to bring it up to the next council hearing and, talk about this. And she said that this is something that happens in Washington, D.C. all the time. And I said, this is something that happens in our country, and we have to decide to take charge of what happens. So that's a little bit on what I was doing. I got to talk to Anton Chaikin, learn a little bit more about the history, and that's something that'll be shown after this Halloween special we're doing for the Vega for Congress on Diane Sayre's symposium. So people should definitely check that out too if you are not out trick-or-treating, or if you happen to be in Europe and watching this as well. So yeah, that's what I was doing, Kynan, and I hope that came across clear. And if anybody's got questions, either you or Dennis, I'm happy to take them. Don't know how long my connection will stay up, but I'm here.
I think probably the best thing for us to do is to get right to the story and then have people watch at 7 o'clock, because that's when the whole issue will be taken up. And in addition to that, I now see that we have one of our guests of honor who's behind me, because tonight's story is the black cat. And you'll see there is a black cat behind me on my right shoulder, behind my right shoulder. That's auspicious. And so this is a story written by Edgar Poe in 1843. And it's basically dedicated to the evening. We're not going to try to, we'll let the story speak for itself. The Black Cat. For the most wild, yet most homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad am I not, and very surely do I not dream. Make that larger if you can. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My purpose is to place before the world, plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror. To many, they will seem less terrible than baroques. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mention the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. That means he started drinking. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me. For what disease is like alcohol? And at length, even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. Kynan?
One night, returning home, much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when, in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of the demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed, at once, to take its flight from my body, and a more than fiendish malevolence gin-nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut one of its eyes from the socket. I blush, I burn, I shudder, while I pen the damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty. But it was, at best, a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented, it is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the home as usual, but, as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by this evident dislike on the part of a creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart, one of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which gave direction to the character of man. Who has not, 100 times, found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination, in the teeth of our best judgment, to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin, a deadly sin that would so jeopardize my immortal soul as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. And
We have another reader?
yeah.
And then who's next? Sarah after that? Or who's
Sarah's next.
Okay, great.
On the night of the day in which this cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flame. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, but I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact that I attributed to its having recently spread, to its having been recently spread. About this wall, a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with a very minute and eager attention. The words strange, singular, and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief, that upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope around the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length, reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of the fire, this garden had been immediately filled by the crowd, by some one of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with the view of arousing me from sleep. The falling of other walls had compressed the victim of my cruelty into a substance of the freshly spread plaster. The time which, with the flames and the ammonia from the carcass, had then accomplished the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus readily accounted to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact just detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came into my spirit a half sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of the animal and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of a somewhat similar appearance with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat, half stupefied, in a den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, and a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite, splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I had once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim of it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature, a certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with in unutterable loathing and to flee silently from its odious presence, as from the breath of a pestilence. What added, no doubt, to my hatred of the beast was the discovery, on the morning after I brought it home, that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a very high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been a distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a pertinacity which it could be difficult to make the reader comprehend. When I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long and sharp claws into my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by the memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess it at once, by an absolute dread of the beast.
Got another reader?
Sarah?
Yep.
Okay.
This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I'm almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as fanciful, it had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shudder to name, and for this above all I loathed and dreaded and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. O mournful and terrible engine of horror and of crime, of agony and of death! And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me a man fashioned in the image of the high God. So much of insufferable woe, Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started, hourly, from dreams of unutterable fear, to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, incumbent internally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates. The darkest and most evil of thoughts, the moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of a fury to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and the most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs and, nearly throwing me headlong, exasperated me to madness. Uplifting an axe and forgetting, in my wrath, the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which of course would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without a groan. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, and with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one period, I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about casting it in the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise, with the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I had considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims.
Marcel? Is he there?
Yes, he's coming now.
Let's see. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall up the hole as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation, I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks and, having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position while, with little trouble, I relaid the whole structure at it as it had originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this, I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care. I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here at last, then, my labor has not been in vain." The next step was to look for the beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at that moment, there would have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the deep, the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. I did not make its appearance, it did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burden of the murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again, I breathed as a freeman. The monster, in terror, had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not in a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burdened to say, if but one word, by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. Gentlemen, I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well constructed house. In the rabid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand, upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of the wife of my bosom. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the arch fiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb, by a cry at first muffled and broken like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant the party upon the stairs remained motionless, though extremity of terror and of awe. In the next, A dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red extended mouth and solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled up the monster within the tomb.
And that is our story for Halloween.
Is Mazel still there?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, she's around. They're both here. You just can't see them. I'm not able to show them to you at the moment. She was entertained. Speaking of which, I did bring my own bottle of Amontillado, by the way.
Oh, that's great.
For those of you who are know the other story of a similar bent. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. Anybody have anything to say? We have Jose at 7, I guess, on the other platform.
Right.
He's not any longer with us at the moment, right? He's not connected.
No, he's not.
Okay. So I guess you can tell people how to see that. But if there's anything to say about the story, or there's any comments in the discussion section, let me know.
Yeah.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, you had a comment, and then there's somebody wrote. You got some things written.
Okay, well, I was shocked. Like, I had no idea what was gonna happen. So when I was reading that, and I realized, oh my God, he just put an axe in his wife's head. Like, my God. So it was really, it's an amazing story, and perfect for Halloween night. And yeah, thank you. Great selection.
Okay. So kind of what do we have in the way of comments?
This is from Brian Early. Moral of Poe story: cats are disposable but not easily rid of.
Oh, God.
All right. Yeah. Okay. I'll accept that. I agree.
I would just say I think this seems to be, it harkens one to the Telltale Heart, but it seems to be a great development of what he creates in that story. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, it's mainly fun for Halloween, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, but if anybody else has anything else to say,
Well, I mean, we've read 3 stories like this. There's the Imp of the Perverse, which, he talks about the perverse towards the middle of it. And it reminds me of what that character describes, for no apparent reason, you just want to do evil for the sake of it, right? That's the argument that he makes. And then there's the Telltale Heart, obviously, which Marcel alluded to. And then there's the Cask of Amontillado. But unlike in the Cask of Amontillado, I think he gets away with the crime. But in the other 3 stories, including this one, they get caught, despite the fact that, they've crafted the perfect crime and everything. But it ends up slipping out. But I mean, I don't exactly know what Poe is exploring with these stories, though. I mean, they seem like horror stories, right? But what is he actually trying to achieve by examining with these stories?
Well, first of all, it's a good story. Sarah already said, "Hey, this is great for Halloween." I mean, there is the thing to writing, stories that are good stories, right? But just think about what he's saying here, because it's I found recently, you probably have also, that you are in these discussions with people and they say to you, but I don't understand what it is these people think they're doing. In other words, you come through and whatever it happens to be, it can be in politics, it can be culturally, it could be something that Trump is doing, whatever, right? It could just whatever it is. People say, but why is this happening? And he has this interesting idea, which is worth thinking about. He says, then came as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit, philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure than that my soul lives, than I am that perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. He says, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or a silly action for no other reason than because he knows he should not? Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law merely because we wanted it to be such? Okay. This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. Notice that. And he says, it was this unfathomable longing of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted. All right, now, I've read this before, The March of Folly, From Troy to Vietnam. I've referred to this, Barbara Tuchman, the historian. Her first chapter begins in this way. It's called The Pursuit of Policy Contrary to Self-Interest. And she says, first paragraph, a phenomenon noticeable throughout history, regardless of place or period, is the pursuit by governments of policies contrary to their own interests. Mankind, it seems, makes a poorer performance of government than of almost any other human activity. In this sphere, wisdom, which may be defined as the exercise of judgment acting on experience, common sense, and available information, is less operative and more frustrated than it should be. Why do holders of high office so often act contrary to the way reason points and enlightened self-interest suggests? Why does intelligent mental process seem so often not to function? Now, what gets interesting here is to explore, not to get obsessed by, but what he's saying here. This is the final overthrow of the soul. That's what he says about perverseness. But how can you understand that? Okay, suppose instead of like us, there's no struggle in your life for money or material wealth. And suppose more than that, you have the power to create not merely material wealth, but the means, for example, money, which is a metaphor. Money sort of used as a metaphor for anything at all in the universe, right? It's like all things are exchangeable through money. So in one sense, money is all things. That's why people who have a lot of it believe that they have powers that they don't necessarily, and that's why other people believe they have powers. For example, people believe that people who are all very, very wealthy are also very intelligent. There is no correspondence whatsoever between people with large amounts of money and intelligence. But people believe that. And one of the reasons they believe is because these people can become or do all these sorts of things, right? But let's ask this question. If you had, by means of, let's say, governing, think of this, kings are one thing, but an emperor is the king of kings. That is, the emperor is the ruler over the various kings. Let's take the Roman Empire. Okay, the emperor, there were kings in Judea, or kings in Macedonia, or kings in other areas. But all of them were part of a confederation that was run by the emperor. All right. So now, if you have that position and you have absolute power in some sense, you have absolute power, how do you express that absolute power? Well, ultimately, you express that absolute power by making people do things they don't want to do, because you can make them do it. So you can express absolute power by, for example, killing people for no reason, it's merely because you would like to. And that's what you have at the Roman games, the Colosseum. The whole business about you turn to the emperor, and whether he puts his hand up, thumbs up or thumbs down. And then sometimes the emperor would ask the people. But the whole notion is that you have the the ability to determine, and therefore this. So but the idea begins to can exist in the mind. I want you to consider this, just to understand how this works. You cause people to do things they would not do. Now, sometimes that's called corruption. So, in the issue of Satan, as Satan is represented, right, in the Garden of Eden, for example, he causes Adam and Eve to think in such a way that they will do what they would not do. That's one example. Now, some people say, oh, no, that's not really what that is. What that really is, that's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And if they eat the fruit, then they're going to know all things. So actually, Satan is freeing them. Well, except for the idea, and I don't want to take this too far, knowledge does not exist in things. I realize that people who believe in the magic mushroom believe that mushrooms contain cosmic knowledge. I do know that. But I'm suggesting to you that that's not true. Knowledge is not in things. And this idea that Poe is dealing with here, I will say to you, is he's asking a question about this characteristic. And Barbara Tuchman is asking another kind of a question. Poe's giving an answer. He's saying, oh, no, the reason I'm doing this because I know I should not. This is some kind of a primitive quality. He's not saying that that is a quality that people ought to have. But he's saying, hey, that's there. And unless you can in some fashion address that, and by the way, you cannot simply address it through rationality. That's the whole point. There has to be a deeper level on which this is addressed. And the deeper level involves something concerning the human emotions. And people like Friedrich Schiller talked about the education of the emotions, that there's an aesthetic education. There is a sense in which the notion of beauty, that is through beauty that one proceeds to freedom. Why? Because perverseness is an obsession. So you're not free. In other words, you're impelled, right? I have an impulse. I'm impelled to do it. It's not about what I decide or don't decide. Oh, I do decide to do the wrong thing, but it's because I'm impelled. I'm gripped. It's the overthrow of my soul. But it's because of the idea that this is some sort of a primitive faculty and therefore has to be addressed, not on the level merely of reason. It can't be just that. It has to be on the level of beauty. Otherwise, it doesn't yield. And so that's what Dante's Commedia deals with, the Divine Comedy, the long poem by Dante. It was really 100 different, it's 100 small, it's made up of 33 poems. There's 3 sections, 33 poems in each section, and then one final poem. So it's 100 altogether. But it's the third part. That's the whole idea of what he's dealing with in the third part of that poem. And most people never read it because they like the first couple of sections, but never quite get through the third part. So I'll say that much about it, if people are interested. But I don't really want to spoil the evening. I think what's important is the story, right? And we have a concluding punctuation behind me.
Let me see where it's Mazel.
Yeah, hurry up.
Oh yeah, there's Mazel. Zoom in.
You have to zoom in. She's right there. You see her.
All right. Yeah, I see her. Yeah, she's coming for the concluding remark.
She knows there's a conclusion now. So,
Okay.
all right. Very good.
All right.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween.
All right.
Halloween.